At exactly 11:07 p.m., someone knocked on my door 3 times. Not the quick knock of a neighbor. Not the confident knock of a friend. It was slow, hesitant, almost afraid. When I opened the door, my heart stopped. Standing under the weak porch light was Margaret, the woman I had once called Mom. She was my ex-mother-in-law, the mother of the woman who had broken my heart and walked out of my life. Her coat was soaked from the rain, her hands were trembling, and she was carrying only a small, worn suitcase. She looked at me with red, exhausted eyes and whispered the words I never expected to hear from her. I had nowhere else to go. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. 7 years earlier, Margaret had been the person who welcomed me into her family. She had hugged me at my wedding to her daughter, Emily, and told me that she finally had the son she always wished she had. I believed her. I loved Emily deeply, and I loved Margaret like my own mother. But after Emily and I divorced, everything changed. The marriage ended quietly at first, but the aftermath was brutal. Emily blamed me for everything, even things neither of us could fix. Margaret believed her daughter, and I couldn't blame her for choosing her own child. But what hurt most was losing Margaret too. She stopped calling. She returned the birthday cards I sent. Eventually, we became strangers who happened to share memories. So when she stood on my doorstep that rainy night, my first instinct was to ask what had happened. My second instinct was to close the door. I was tired. I had spent years rebuilding a life that had been shattered, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to let the past walk back inside. But then I looked at her suitcase. It was small enough to hold everything she had left. And something inside me softened. I stepped aside and told her she could come in. If you believe that sometimes people deserve a second chance, even when the past has hurt us, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Studio for more stories about forgiveness, second chances, and the unexpected people who change our lives. Margaret entered slowly, almost as if she expected me to change my mind. I gave her a towel and made tea while she sat silently at my kitchen table. The woman who had once filled rooms with laughter now looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair had turned almost completely gray. There were deep lines around her eyes that hadn't been there the last time I saw her. I asked her where she had been living, and she stared into her tea for several seconds before finally telling me the truth. Emily had moved to another state nearly 2 years earlier. Margaret had gone with her after her husband passed away. She had sold her house, believing she was starting a new chapter with her daughter. But things didn't go the way she imagined. Emily had married again, and her new husband never wanted Margaret around. At first, they told her she could stay temporarily. Then the temporary arrangement became uncomfortable. Arguments became common. Eventually, Emily told her mother that she needed to find somewhere else to live. Margaret had nowhere to go. She had spent the last 3 nights in a cheap motel, using the last of her savings. She had called relatives, but nobody answered. She had tried an old friend who no longer lived at the address she had. Finally, with nowhere else left, she remembered the men she once considered her son. Me. I listened without interrupting. I wanted to be angry. Part of me thought she deserved to experience the consequences of the family that had turned its back on me. But as I watched her struggle to hold back tears, I realized something uncomfortable. Pain doesn't become smaller when we pass it to someone else. I showed her the guest room. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Emily. I wondered whether she knew where her mother was. I wondered why Margaret had chosen my door after everything that happened. Most of all, I wondered whether I had made a mistake by letting her in. The next morning, I found her standing in the kitchen, washing the few dishes I had left in the sink. She apologized for being a burden. I told her she wasn't. She smiled faintly and said something that stayed with me all day. She said she had spent years believing that asking for help was weakness, but losing everything had taught her that sometimes surviving meant admitting you couldn't do it alone. Over the next few weeks, Margaret and I slowly rebuilt something neither of us expected. I helped her find a small apartment nearby. She applied for work at a local library, where she had once volunteered years ago. I helped her organize paperwork, make phone calls, and replace the things she had lost. She insisted on paying me back, but I refused. One evening, while we were eating dinner, she finally asked the question I knew was coming. She wanted to know whether I hated her. I put my fork down. I told her that I had hated what happened. I had hated being blamed. I had hated losing people I loved. But I never truly hated her. She wiped her eyes and admitted that she had regretted the way she treated me for years. She had believed that protecting Emily meant believing everything Emily said. Only after seeing how her daughter's life turned out did she realize how unfairly she had judged me. Then she told me something that broke through the last wall inside me. She said Emily had once admitted that I wasn't the reason the marriage failed. She had been afraid to tell me because she didn't want to face what she had done. Margaret had carried that secret for years. I sat there in silence. There was a strange peace in hearing it. Not because I needed Emily's confession to move forward, but because for the first time, I knew I hadn't imagined the love I had given that marriage. It had been real. It simply hadn't been enough to save two people who were growing in different directions. Months passed. Margaret found a small apartment and began working part-time at the library. She became part of my... On the back, she had written a single sentence: "I lost a son when I lost my daughter, but somehow life gave me the chance to find him again." I couldn't hold back my tears. I realized that night at 11:07 p.m. hadn't been an interruption to my life. It had been an unexpected doorway into forgiveness. Not every broken relationship can be repaired. Not every person who hurts us deserves unlimited access to our lives. But sometimes, forgiveness isn't about pretending the past never happened. Sometimes, it's simply deciding that the past doesn't get to control who we become. A year after that rainy night, Margaret invited me to Thanksgiving dinner. There were only 4 people at the table: Margaret, me, her old friend Linda, and a young woman from the library whom Margaret had recently befriended. There was laughter, warm food, and the kind of peace that neither of us thought we'd ever experience again. Before dinner, Margaret raised her glass and thanked me for opening my door that night. I told her she had opened mine long before that. She had simply forgotten. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who may need a reminder that kindness can come back in the most unexpected ways, and subscribe to Kindness Studio. Your support helps these stories reach people who might need them. And before we end, I have one special request: comment, "Everyone deserves a second chance," if you believe that forgiveness can sometimes heal wounds that time alone never could. Because sometimes, the person standing outside your door at 11 p.m. isn't there to remind you of your past. Sometimes, they're there to show you how much your heart has changed.